The ancient prison cracked like old bones breaking under pressure. Deep beneath the mountain, where no sunlight had touched for 3,000 years, the magical chains began to weaken. The fire elemental named Paraxis felt the bonds loosening around its burning core. It had waited so long for this moment. Every century felt like a single heartbeat to an immortal being, but even immortals could feel the weight of captivity. Paraxis remembered the day of its capture clearly. A human mage named Aldrich Thornwood had tricked it. The elemental had underestimated the small creature made of flesh and water. Humans were supposed to be weak. They lived such short lives. What could they possibly understand about power? But Aldrich had been different. He had studied for 40 years just to create the binding spell. 40 years was almost nothing to Paraxis, but for a human, it was half a lifetime spent on a single goal. The last chain snapped with a sound like thunder. Paraxis expanded its form, filling the underground chamber with flames that reached temperatures hot enough to melt stone. The walls around it began to glow red, then orange, then white. The elemental laughed, and its laughter sounded like a forest fire consuming everything in its path. Freedom tasted like ash and smoke and pure destruction. Far above the mountain, in a small village called Thornhaven, the descendants of Aldrich Thornwood felt the earth shake beneath their feet. Marcus Thornwood dropped the book he was reading and ran to the window. He was a young man of 25 years, with dark hair and tired eyes. Unlike his famous ancestor, Marcus had never wanted to be a mage. He preferred books about history and philosophy. Magic seemed too dangerous, too unpredictable. But magic was in his blood, whether he wanted it or not. His grandmother rushed into his room without knocking. Her name was Elena, and she was the current keeper of the Thornwood secrets. Her face was pale with fear, and Marcus had never seen her look so frightened in all his years. She spoke quickly and urgently. "The seal is broken. Paraxis is free. We must run immediately. There is no time to gather belongings or say goodbye to neighbors." Marcus did not understand at first. He had heard stories about the fire elemental, but he thought they were just family legends. Every old family had stories about their ancestors doing great and impossible things. He never believed that his own ancestor had actually imprisoned a being of pure fire beneath a mountain. Elena grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the door. She explained while they ran through the streets. Aldrich made a deal with the elemental before binding it. The deal was simple and terrible. If Paraxis ever broke free, it would hunt down every person carrying Thornwood blood. It would not stop until the entire family line was erased from existence. This was the price of the binding spell. Aldrich had accepted this price because he believed the prison would last forever. Nothing lasts forever. Marcus understood this truth better than most people. He had read enough history to know that every empire falls, every wall crumbles, and every chain eventually breaks. They reached the edge of the village and kept running. Behind them, the mountain began to glow with an inner light. Paraxis was rising from its ancient prison, and it was angry beyond measure. 3,000 years of captivity had turned its hatred into something pure and focused. The elemental did not care about destroying the world or conquering kingdoms. It only wanted one thing: revenge against the family that had stolen its freedom. Marcus and Elena traveled for 3 days without stopping for more than a few hours at a time. They moved through forests and across rivers. They avoided roads because Paraxis could sense magical bloodlines. The Thornwood family had been hiding from this possibility for generations. They had secret paths and hidden shelters prepared throughout the land. On the 4th day, they reached a small cottage deep in the wilderness. Elena collapsed into a chair, exhausted beyond words. She was old, and the journey had taken everything from her. Marcus brought her water and food, but she pushed them away. She told him the truth then, all of it, the things the family had kept secret even from its own members. Aldrich had not simply bound the fire elemental. He had done something much more clever and much more cruel. He had taken a piece of Paraxis and planted it inside his own bloodline. This was why the elemental could sense them. This was why it would hunt them forever. But it was also why they could fight back. Every Thornwood descendant carried a spark of elemental fire inside them. Most never awakened this power. They lived normal lives and died normal deaths, never knowing what burned within their souls. But in times of great danger, the spark could become a flame. Elena reached out and touched Marcus on the forehead. She spoke words in an ancient language that Marcus did not recognize. Something inside him began to wake up. It felt like swallowing the sun. It felt like his blood was turning into liquid light. He screamed, but not from pain. The sensation was overwhelming in ways that went beyond simple pleasure or suffering. He was becoming something more than human, and the transformation was both beautiful and terrifying. When it was over, Marcus looked at his hands. They seemed normal, but he could feel the fire sleeping just beneath his skin. He understood now why his ancestor had been able to defeat a being of pure flame. Aldrich had not fought Paraxis with human strength. He had fought fire with fire. Elena smiled weakly. She explained that the awakening had taken the last of her strength. She would not survive the night. But she had given Marcus the weapon he needed. He could face Paraxis now. He could end this ancient war once and for all. Marcus wanted to argue. He wanted to say that he was not a warrior or a mage. He was just a young man who liked reading books. But he looked at his grandmother, and he saw the faith in her eyes. She believed in him. His entire family line had been waiting for this moment, passing down secrets and preparing for the day when someone would finally have to face the fire elemental. He left the cottage before dawn. Elena passed away quietly in her sleep, finally free from the burden she had carried her entire life. Marcus buried her beneath an old oak tree and said words of farewell. Then he turned and walked toward the burning light on the horizon. Paraxis had destroyed 3 villages already. The elemental was not trying to hide. It wanted the last Thornwood to come to it. It wanted a final confrontation, a chance to destroy the bloodline that had humiliated it so long ago. They met on an empty plain where nothing grew and nothing lived. The grass had been burned away, leaving only blackened earth. The air shimmered with heat waves that made everything look unreal and dreamlike. Paraxis took the form of a giant made entirely of flames. Its eyes were 2 stars burning with hatred older than human civilization. It looked down at the small creature standing before it and laughed again with that terrible sound of consuming fire. The elemental spoke in a voice that crackled like burning wood. It called Marcus a fool and a coward. It said that running had been pointless. It said that the Thornwood line would end here and now, forgotten by history and erased from memory. Marcus did not run. He stood his ground and looked up at the towering inferno without fear. He reached inside himself and found the spark that Elena had awakened. It responded to his call, growing from a spark to a flame to a roaring fire that filled his entire being. The transformation was visible. His eyes began to glow with golden light. Fire danced across his skin without burning him. His voice, when he spoke, carried the echo of flames. He told Paraxis the truth that the elemental had never understood. Humans were not weak because they lived short lives. They were strong because of it. They did not have eternity to accomplish their goals. They had to focus, to sacrifice, to give everything they had to the things that mattered most. Aldrich had spent 40 years creating the binding spell. That was half his life. He gave up marriage, children, comfort, and peace. He gave up everything just to stop one destructive force from hurting innocent people. That kind of dedication, that kind of sacrifice, was something an immortal being could never truly understand. Marcus raised his hands, and fire leaped from his palms to meet the elemental's flames. The 2 fires clashed in the air between them, fighting for dominance. Paraxis was older and more powerful, but Marcus had something the elemental lacked: He had purpose beyond revenge. He had love for the people he was protecting. He had the strength that came from knowing exactly what you were fighting for. The battle lasted for hours. They exchanged flames like warriors exchanging sword blows. They circled each other across the scorched earth, looking for weaknesses and openings. Marcus took wounds that should have killed him, but the fire inside him healed the damage almost as quickly as it was dealt. Finally, Marcus saw his chance. Paraxis made a mistake, overreaching in its eagerness to destroy him. Marcus ducked under a wave of fire and charged directly at the elemental's core. He plunged his hands into the burning heart of the ancient being and grabbed hold of something solid and real beneath all those flames. It was the spark that Aldrich had taken 3,000 years ago, the piece of Paraxis that lived inside the Thornwood bloodline. Marcus could feel his ancestors' power mixing with his own, combining with the elemental fire that had been passed down through generations. He pulled with everything he had, not just physical strength, but the strength of everyone who had come before him. His grandmother Elena, who had carried the secret for 60 years. His parents, who had died protecting him when he was a child. His great-grandparents and their parents before them. Every Thornwood who had ever lived, all adding their strength to this final moment. Paraxis screamed as Marcus tore its essence apart. The elemental had been powerful once, but 3,000 years in prison had weakened it more than it realized. And the piece that Aldrich had taken had grown over the generations, multiplied by every new life in the Thornwood line. The fire elemental did not die. Beings like Paraxis could not truly be destroyed, but Marcus broke it into 1,000 smaller flames that scattered across the world. None of them would ever be powerful enough to hurt anyone again. They would be small spirits of warmth and light, campfires and hearth flames that would help humans instead of harming them. Marcus fell to his knees as the last of Paraxis dispersed into the wind. The fire inside him cooled but did not disappear. It had become a permanent part of who he was. He was still human, but he was also something more now. A bridge between two worlds. He stood up slowly and looked around at the scorched earth. Already, he could see small green shoots pushing up through the blackened soil. Life was returning. The land would heal. He turned and began walking home. Not to Thornhaven, which Paraxis had destroyed, but to wherever he would build his new life. He carried his family's legacy inside him, and he would honor it by living well. He would have children someday, and they would inherit both his humanity and his fire. The mage who had bound the elemental had run away, but his descendant had stayed and fought. That was what humans did. They faced impossible odds and found ways to win. Not through immortal power, but through love, sacrifice, and the stubborn refusal to give up. Paraxis had never understood this truth. That was why it lost. That was why humanity would always survive. Marcus smiled as the sun rose over the horizon. The fire inside him burned warmly, and for the first time in his life, he did not feel afraid of what the future might bring.